Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Historia Politica Pública. This is the third episode of the series about Emma Goldman. In the first two episodes, I talk about one of her most famous essays, which is called Anarchism, what it stands for. It's a definition what means anarchism for her. There were some kind of reference to great anarchists from the past, like Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Peter Kropotkin, Bakunin, and many others. And in this last episode of this series, I want to talk about other of the essays that is compiled in her book Anarchism and Other Essays, which is called Marriage and Love. This is a criticism about the idea of institutional marriage as a kind of imposing a notion of the love among our society, but at the end just serves to stultify our minds and also to kind of control the people who are living in society. In addition, I want to talk about Emma Goldman during the Spanish Civil War, because she went to Barcelona in 1936 after Franco coup d'etat, and she praised the anarchist ideals that were developing in the Catalan city, specifically through the efforts carried by the members of the CNT, the Confederación Nacional del Trabajo. So, starting for her essay Marriage and Love, she points that, quote, it is utterly false that love results from marriage, end quote, because according to her, marriage is primarily an economic arrangement, an insurance pact, end quote. Remember that for Emma Goldman, the idea of freedom, the idea of love must go together. So if you are going to love somebody, being your partner, your parents, your children, your friends, or other people around the world, you must be free to kind of develop your feelings towards them. This is a kind of organic relation that is being shaping your life. This is not to think that because you have a family, you are forced to love them. On the contrary, you can love everybody, but this must depend on how you create a kind of bonding with this person and so on, but this cannot impose from above. And for that reason, she blames marriage as a kind of contract which is trying to link together people who do not have things in common, but it is done with the beneplácit of the church, under the surveillance of the state, and in order to proceed with capitalism. This relates with the idea of Silvia Federici, who wrote a book called Caliban and the Witch, in which she pointed how the women in the past, in the medieval age, that were the more progressive mind, that wanted to emancipate themselves, were those who mostly were burned in the stake because they were considered dangerous for their kind of advanced ideas for that time. So in that sense, for Emma Goldman, capitalism, religion, and the state are the three pillars who are trying to force women to marriage into men, and at the end, both of them, they will be kind of neglected, will have a miserable life, and so on. Because it's true that in this essay, Emma Goldman emphasizes more the role of women as kind of victims of this institution, but she also points that the men suffers during this kind of marriage because they are forced to kind of work all the time, and after they go home, they don't want to see the wife, which is living under miserable conditions. So here you have a cross between these two people. So for Goldman, as long as we do not eliminate those three kind of pillars, remember in the last episode I mentioned that she points to religion, property, and government, those pernicious influences which have so far prevent the harmonious blending of individual and social instincts. According to her, love is a social and individual instinct, and hence for religion, who dominates the human mind, property, who dominates the human needs, and government, who dominates the human conduct, are far from these ideas of love and cannot interlink together. In that sense, Emma Goldman mentions that, quote, separate by an insurmountable wall of superstition, custom, and habit, marriage has not the potentiality of developing knowledge of and respect for each other. without which every union is doomed to failure. In other words, you can stay with a person because you love that person and you can have a nice life, create a good bonding, but as soon as this kind of contract is imposed upon yourself, this will be doomed to failure, according to Emma Goldman words. And in that sense, she relates this kind of propaganda carried by the media with the help of religion to mention that, quote, the myth that woman has no soul, that she's a mere appendix to man made out of his rib, end quote, is the things that make the marriage not working at all. So this kind of reference to the original sin with Adam, Eve, that Eve was accordingly to Christianity made out of the rib of Adam, it seems to remember that religion has had in all history a great importance in order to stultify the mind of people, in order to condition their kind of attitudes towards each other. And in that sense, woman has always been living under servitude and kind of slavery approach doing by society. In that sense, for her, it's very important to teach about sex and teach about marriage in order to avoid people to fall under these traps. However, this is ironic because, as she mentions, quote, the prospective wife and mother is kept in complete ignorance of her only asset in the competitive field, sex, end quote. So here we have a paradox in which the women are praised as kind of essential for reproducing life. They are kind of forced to have children and get married, but at the same time, when they are growing up, they are never told about sex, never told about how to have sexual relations. It is important to remember that this essay was written 100 years ago, and it is true that society has progressed in a huge great wave, but still it is not easy to speak about sexual relation when people are kids. There is always a great backlash, especially for the conservative forces, in order to teach men and women when they are kids about sexual relation, using protective measures of contraception and so on. And in fact, even nowadays, women that are free thinkers who are advocating for an idea of free love, same as Emma Goldman did 100 years ago, they are being demonized by the different forces like the church, the far-right members, and so on. We have still kind of debates about the abortion, about the right to marriage with whoever you want, and we see how just last year in the United States, the Roe v. Wade legislation was prohibited. It was carried on 1973 to make abortion legal, but now in some states has been illegalized again 50 years later, which is a good lesson to understand that even though you fight for rights, and those are eventually accomplished in many occasions, those kind of forces who want to curtail our freedom are always keen to fight back. So don't take for granted the rights that has been accomplished in the past, because you don't realize at the moment that these freedoms are being diminished, but you can end without rights at all. In that sense, Emma Goldman points to the mystery of marriage, how due to the criminal ignorance in sex mothers, that is being established as a great virtue. Another, again, education is fundamental for anarchism. If the women are not being taught about what really means to get married, this kind of forcing bonding which is imposed upon yourself, you will probably fall into this kind of current. Nowadays, it's true that, especially in the Western world, people are not forced to marry in an explicit way as before, because many material conditions and social consciousness have changed. For instance, now women are able to work in the public sphere, they have rights, there is the right to divorce and many other advances that has been accomplished through the working class movement in the last 100 years. However, there is also this social conditioning, which is more subtle, more implicit in the kind of comments of every day. This idea that Pierre Bourdieu called habitus, the way that, let's say, you are living in a kind of city, you are surrounded by people who are, all of them are married, they have children, and you are a woman who really do not want to either get married or get children. But because you are living in this environment where all your friends, loved ones have formed a family, a nuclear family, you may be forced to find a person and to have children. Or even the kind of comments that people in your family or your close circle can make to you, like, okay, you are now, let's say, 42 years old, the clock is ticking, have you thought about forming a family, finding a person, having children? You know, these ideas that obviously will penetrate into your mind, because as human beings we are influenced by our surroundings, and the comments that people can make are very powerful. Same as we can have a great power of influence among other people. This can happen also to us. So this is an important aspect to take in consideration. When do we think by ourselves? How do we realize if we are doing something because we really want, or we have been conditioned to do so? Do we have free will, really? These kind of questions are very important to think about, and even though we may not find a kind of clear answer, but still it's good to keep asking yourself questions in order to know better yourself and realizing how the society around you can create a great influence upon yourself. Going forward in the essay of Marriage and Love by Emma Goldman, she points how a marriage is related with practical life, and this idea that capitalism and marriage are together. Let's say, like, okay, if you get married at the end, or you have a long life partner, you have children, you will have benefit from the state, you will pay less for living in a house, rather than if you are living alone, or even if you are living with a person who you don't get married and you don't have children, you will not have access to benefits in many countries. So from the state, there is a pushing to yourself to have a family, because it will help you economically. And nowadays the current world is so turbulent. There are many crises: the social crisis, economic, political, health crisis. So many people want to get married in order to receive money from different institutions and being able to survive. So sometimes it's just a forcing upon yourself, even though there is nobody pointing with their finger and kind of obligating you to have children, but still the social conditions in which you are living for may push you in that direction. Same as if you want to live in a country, and let's say you want to live in the United States, and you don't have the right to live there because the restrictions to immigrants are very rigid, are kind of harsh. So you may force yourself to marry with somebody there, and henceforth you will be able to live there. So these kind of ideas of how marriage has penetrated in different spheres in societies in order to create families which are alienated from the others, and avoid in that sense the kind of movement of protest, alienating each other in order to atomize the society. Probably the person who better put that into words was Margaret Thatcher in 1970s, when she mentioned that there is no such a thing as a society, there is only your family, and that's all. She used this rhetoric in order to cut in half the working class movement that were happening in 1960, 1970, 1980s, specifically in Britain, but also over the world. How this idea was fundamental to make people not join together in the public sphere to protest. because at that time the paradigm was one of huge level of unemployment after the crisis of 1973. She used this rhetoric weapon in order to change the mentality of the working class. Before, there was a great wave of solidarity among different groups, but from Margaret Thatcher on, it was this idea that because there were not enough work for people, she played with the kind of enmity between each other. Like, let's say, if there are 10 jobs available and there are 50 people, she mentioned that, okay, you need to compete between each other to see who is the best of all of you. In that sense, she was hoping to create an individualistic society in order to fight forward the kind of scarcity which were there, whereas in the 1950s, 60s, there was, the levels of unemployment were so low. I was reading statistics the other day, and in Britain, I think in 1950 was below the 2%, in West Germany below 1%, United States something like that, 3%, something which is unbelievable to think nowadays. She was very successful, unfortunately, on that approach to break up the solidarity and mutual aid of the working class. And coming with the other quotes that Emma mentioned, this is an irony of the emancipation, in which she points how, quote, 6 million women are wage worker and they have the equal right with men, the rights to be exploited, to be robbed, and so on. So she points how emancipation, in order to see analyze better, is a lie, because at the end what it does is put women in the working sphere, wage sphere. Okay, they can earn wage now, but at the end they will have to take care of the household, do the housework, and so on. And this is something that happened nowadays. There was a recent report in which it said that, okay, women and men, perhaps they work same amount of hours outside their house, but in their home, the women are usually working much more hours than men, like cleaning, cooking, taking care of the children, and so on. So at the end, for Emma Goldman, emancipation, it doesn't make sense as long as we do not change the capitalist system. So, and keep going with the essay of Emma Goldman. She points how women are forced to be at home, and in doing so, they will kind of become smaller in the cage. This is something that Emma Goldman point in The Anarchist, what it stands for, how other political thinkers analyze the animals who were living in cage in the farm and how they develop sad feelings, bad behaviors comparing with that was living in liberty. Same with the humans. And she point how, quote, small wonder if when the woman is forced to be at home becomes a petty, quarrelsome, gossipy, unbearable. She becomes reckless in appearance, clumsy, cowardly, aggregate, and a bore, which most men grow to hate and despise. The women are prisoners in their home. So, not having anything to do outside, being forced to take care of their housework, they will develop attitudes which are only against their own nature. And eventually this will obviously affect the marriage, which for Goldman has been imposed upon themselves. At the same time, there is an hypocrisy, because if, according to Goldman, marriage protects the child, why there are thousands of children destitute and homeless? This is incredibly interesting, and nowadays we can extrapolate to the idea that, okay, there are people who want to have children, there are many thousands of people who do not have parents, who are destitute even in other countries, and people who want to adopt these children in order to save their life, they are being faced with a huge amount of bureaucracy. They need to pay a lot of money for that. So the states in the world, they are not helping of parents to help these children. So there is an hypocrisy which Emma Goldman pointed like 100 years ago. This idea that, okay, if in theory marriage must help to have children because they are the best of society, why cannot we adopt other people who they are already alive and we can save them? So everything is done in order to make people more difficult to adopt children. You need to wait for a long time, many times years, pay a lot of money, do a lot of proofs, and so on. And same with the prison system, that Emma Goldman say, okay, the prison, if it's to keep criminals, but many people are criminals because they don't have anything to eat. If they have children, obviously they will be forced more to steal. And after, if the father or the mother go to prison, who is going to take care of the kid? And so this kind of philosophical ideas that Emma Goldman is wondering and asking herself and pointing to the reader in order to keep asking their question and try to find some solution. Anarchism in that sense, again, is to develop your knowledge, try to read, being aware of what is happening around yourself, commentate the reality with the different people around and engage with each other in order to listen to other perspective and try to accomplish a different aims in order to help the different members of society. And just to finish in this essay that is shorter than the other, she praises the idea of love. She points, love is the strongest and deepest element in all life, the harbinger of hope. So, how can such in all compelling force be synonymous with the poor little state and charge be gotten with marriage? End quote. In that sense, she points that the reason why marriage is imposed is because the defenders of authority dread the advent of a free motherhood, lest it will rob them of their prey. What means Emma Goldman to the prey that the state and the church and the capitalists want to steal? Obviously, those children who later will fight the wars, will work in society, will become the police, which will repress the social movement and so on. And she wonders who will fight wars if those people are not born. So for that, always the idea of the free mother who do not want to have children, do not want to get involved in marriage to avoid the forced bond that has fall upon themselves. It is a real threat for society. And nowadays we see in our world how there is a huge problem because the people are living more than ever and they are having less children than before. So especially in Europe, there is a kind of old society. So now different states want to impose policies to force men and women to have children. At the same time, there are even policies to allow more migrants, although this is kind of paradoxical because the far-right parties are gaining points, are gaining popularity, increasing their visibility through the scapegoating of immigrants. It is difficult that other in power, other politicians let immigrants to come to their countries. I'm not saying that many politicians would like to help these destitute people coming from war, from misery, from poverty, and some poverty that most of the time the Europeans have helped during the last centuries to impose upon them, like invading those countries, colonizing them, stealing their richness, their resources, and so on. But the thing is, like, many of the people who want immigrants to come to different countries are doing that by economic means, because they say, okay, the immigrants come to work to a country. This will help, obviously, the kind of public treasure, will pay taxes, will increase the public services in each country. This was very clear during the Brexit time, in which there were many reports in which they were saying, like, okay, there was one in which it was demonstrated that an immigrant who came to UK when is young until he died will have paid normally 80,000 pounds to the public service. Like the difference between all the public service that you have used during that time and the number of taxes that you have paid. Whereas a British person, his or her balance will be zero. Because according to this report, they tend to use more the public service and so on. So it is obviously that immigration is good for the economy, but there are other politicians who they are willing to accept immigrants because they consider that it is our humanitarian duty to take them. So there are different approaches, but obviously with the neo-fascist far-right movement who want to point them as the cause of the crisis, like, oh, they say that they are still in the jobs and so on. It is very difficult for other politicians to be brave enough in order to allow these people to come to our countries. In that sense, just to finish with Emma Goldman, she pointed out love in freedom is the only condition of a beautiful life. And with that, woman no longer wants to be apathy to the production of a race of sickly, feeble, decrepit, great human beings. I don't think when she says woman no longer wants to be a party to the production, I doubt that she had any time want to do so. But the thing is, like, because now there are more media, they can engage more freely in public sphere. The thing is, like, they are meeting other women, other people, and their demands are being pushed towards the institution, and they are having more visibility, especially nowadays with the feminist movement and so. But the thing is, like, it's important again. Education, social movement, grouping together with different people, avoid individualization, the atomization that capitalism want to impose upon ourselves is doomed to fail our prospect for achieve an egalitarian society. In that sense, just to finish the essay, she finished with a nice sentence relating love and fight against capitalism with this phrase like, quote, "If delicate fiber," speaking love delicate fiber cannot endure the stress and strain of the daily grind. In other words, in order to love, you need a kind of freedom. You cannot be a cog in the machine. You need to be able to meet the other person, or the other person, if you are you believe in free love with everybody. And in that sense, the idea of working 8 hours per day will just stultify your minds and will not let you to realize the power of love. And just to finish, I will end with some of the interventions of Emma Goldman during the Spanish Civil War. When after Franco coup d'etat in the 18th of July of 1936, she was invited to Barcelona in order to speak in front of the people there. She was welcomed by the Confederación Nacional del Trabajo, the CNT, and the Federación Anarquista Ibérica, the FAI, and for the first time in her life, she lived in a community run by and for anarchists, according to true anarchist principles. And she mentions, quote, "In all my life, I have not met with such warm hospitality, comradeship, and solidarity," end quote. Going to Huesca, she mentioned, quote, "Your revolution will destroy forever the notion that anarchism stands for chaos." And she began editing the weekly CNT FEA information bulletin and respond to English language mail. So she was deeply involved in the Spanish Revolution in Barcelona because she believed that it was the best example that she ever witnessed about anarchism. It's important because George Orwell also went to Barcelona in 1936, December 1936, to fight against Franco with the International Brigade, and in his book Homage to Catalonia, he had a beautiful statement about the reality that he saw in that city, pointing that he had never seen such an egalitarian society in which everybody was the same. There was no distinction of class, of ranks, and so on. Nobody call each other usted. Usted is like the Spanish term to refer to a person who in theory is or older than you or from upper class and so on. Because in English you have you for two and usted, there is not this distinction, but George Orwell was able to grasp that when he went to Barcelona, same year as Emma Goldman. Orwell was also an anarchist, so they both were amazed about what was going happening in Catalonia. However, Goldman began to worry about the future of Spain anarchism when the CNT joined a coalition government in 1937. Because she did not trust the Soviet communists. Remember that she had traveled to Russia in 1919, and similarly as Peter Kropotkin was disappointed by the authoritarian current that was taking the Soviet Union. In fact, the Soviet Union refused to send weapons to anarchist forces in Spain, and there was disinformation campaigns being waged against the anarchists across Europe and the US. George Orwell compiled these ideas in the book Homage to Catalonia, and also it helped him to develop 1984 and Animal Farm. In one of his texts, Orwell pointed that everything that he wrote politically in the 1940s was through the kind of experience he had in Catalonia. The most important books, Animal Farm and 1984, were a clear reflection of what he had seen in Catalonia, in Huesca and Barcelona specifically, Aragon and Catalonia, and how this kind of propaganda, disinformation campaign had crushed the Spanish Republican forces during the Civil War. Precisely in May 1937, the communist-led force attacked anarchist strongholds and broke up agrarian collective in Barcelona, and the newspapers in England point to those events. George Orwell, who was in Barcelona in May 1937, and wrote about this in Homage to Catalonia, point that the accounts of the Barcelona riots in May beat everything I have ever seen for lying. When Goldman returned to Spain in September, she saw how the Spanish left-wing forces were fighting each other, and Franco was eventually kind of going to win the Civil War. In fact, the nationalist forces declared victory in Spain just before she returned to London. She was frustrated in England and returned to Canada in 1937. In that sense, just to add a final thing about her involvement, when she, on her 70th birthday, which is in 1939, 1 year before she died, the former Secretary General of the CNT and FEA, Mariano Vázquez, sent a message to her from Paris praising her for her contributions and naming her as, quote, our spiritual mother. And Emma Goldman refers to that letter as the most beautiful tribute I have ever received. Henceforth, Goldman and the anarchism in Barcelona, they were linked together. She was satisfied by what she saw during the first year until this anarchist movement were crushed by the allegedly allied of the Spanish Republic. And just to finish, she died on May 1940, some months before she started to write about the Second World War, and she again reiterated her opposition to wars waged by government, same as she did during the First World War. As a long-time pacifist anti-war, she can be a source of inspiration for nowadays, especially in a current world which is becoming more worrisome, with warmongers trying to finance and take credit of the war and earning a lot of benefits for that. Just to finish, I will end with this quote, which was, she mentioned that, much as I loathe Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin and Franco, I will not support a war against them and for the democracies which in the last analysis are only fascists in disguise. She felt that Britain and France had missed their opportunity to oppose fascism in the Spanish Civil War, and that the coming war would only result in a new form of madness in the planet. She did not live enough to see the end of the war, but probably if she would have seen how the British and French people keep massacring civilians in the colonies, like the French in Algeria or the English provoking the civil war in India and Pakistan after the partition, she would have kind of remember her words and have said, okay, now they are considered the good guys, the liberal democracies, but first of all, they failed to help Spain in the fight against fascism, and second of all, after the Nazis and the fascists were defeated, they still commit crimes in their colonies, the British in Kenya, with the concentration camps, French in Algeria, and so on. We'll finish here the episode of Emma Goldman. I will do another, but probably in the future, about her tales about the individual and the society, which I think is the last that she wrote. She wrote over 200,000 pamphlets, letters, according to one statistic that I just checked this morning. And the thing is, this one is one of her last one, and it's very easy because I think it compiled all her thinking that was developing through her life. But for the moment, I will finish here the series about Emma Goldman.